Hello, and welcome to Alcohol-Free Radio. I'm your host, Chris Becker, and I'm excited to have you join us. Whether you are new to the amazing and growing alcohol-free community or someone who is already familiar, we hope you enjoy our program. This is where you can hear from some people making a real difference, whether as brewers or producers of amazing beverages, influencers in the community, authors, storytellers, and more. We aim to break it down and bring it all together. Our goal is simple: to build awareness about this great community and to help make alcohol-free fun, easy, and tasting great. So here we go. Enjoy. Hey there, this is Chris Becker, and welcome to Alcohol-Free Radio. I am excited about the episode you are about to hear. I get to meet and talk with Derek Brown, somebody who's definitely a trendsetter in the industry. So without too much intro, you will hear us dive in. So hope you enjoy. Take care. Hey there. Welcome to this episode of Alcohol-Free Radio. I am excited to have Derek Brown with me. I will say a few words, but without too much ado, let Derek tell me more about what is going on. So Derek and I have met and maybe known of each other through the alcohol-free industry for, at least I've known of him for over a year or more. Business owner, restaurateur, mixologist, bartender with extensive experience really in, traditional hospitality. And then for reasons that we will dive into, learn more about what's got him interested in the non-alc space. Founder of the Columbia Room in Washington, D.C., which is a well-renowned restaurant and bar speakeasy in D.C., which he was, I'll let Derek talk about recent exit, and is now starting Positive Damage, which is a new startup. So, Derek, welcome.
Yeah. Hey, Chris. Thank you for including me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Tell us a bit more about kind of what I quickly highlighted, your restaurant experience, the Columbia Room, and where that's taken you.
Sure. I actually started in the business when I was 16 years old.
Wow.
So I left my house. I went on my own, and I started to work in a Jewish deli called BJ Pumpernickel's. Right.
Okay.
And so I was I'll say garde manger, but I think the proper term, more appropriate term for the time, was salad prep. And so I essentially would take, like there's like a bed of romaine lettuce, actually probably just one leaf. And I'd put, tuna salad and egg salad and whitefish salad and a little olive on top of each one of those. And that was sort of my art, if you will. And so that's kind of how I started in the business. The funny part of that is that that's also how I realized that I was not suited for the back of the house, because the owner of the place, Barry Schwartz, is a really great guy, larger than life character.
Right.
Caught me talking in the kitchen one day. And so he grabbed me by the scruff of the neck, and he was huge. I was tiny. And he just kind of pulled me out to the deli counter and said, "Here, put your mouth where it can work." And so after that, I guess I moved from back of the house to front of the house. Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
So I worked in bars and restaurants since I was 16. And, for a long time, it really wasn't what I intended to make my living out of. But when I became a bartender sometime in my 20s, like late 20s, 26, 27, something like that, that's when I kind of found this job that really fit for me. And it was like the creativity behind it, the social aspect of all of it was really exciting. This is before really the classic cocktail movement had kind of made this impression on the world.
Right.
But I was starting to make cocktails and I was excited about it. That whole culture, we can get into that later, is can be one that teaches you a lot of the wrong ways to drink alcohol, but we can get into that.
Sure.
But I think
I'm picturing like Kitchen Confidential.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I read that. I was like, "Whoa, that's it." No, just kidding. Joking. So I think that like essentially what happened was, for me, is that I fell in love with bartending, and I from there I started reading a lot about it and devouring everything I could. And I really thought to myself that somebody in the world is the best bartender in the world. I didn't see why that couldn't be me. Right. And so that's when I kind of went down this path, because I it's kind of a shiftless loser. I had no idea what I was going to do. I was just kind of working in restaurants and trying to figure out my life. And so I dedicated myself to bartending, and I learned as much as I could. So along the way, I got the opportunity to read and learn and learn a lot from kind of older bartenders, you know, the
Right.
different recipes.
Right.
And then it was like at the birth of this classic cocktail movement. And that really, you know, influenced me. And so I started making great classic cocktails and, you know, people were excited about this sort of speakeasy culture and all of
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
And that kind of catapulted me into this position where I got to talk a lot about cocktails. I mean, I opened the Columbia Room in 2010. And by
Okay.
then, I kind of already made a name for myself in the industry doing, you know, work as a sommelier and by doing beverage programs.
Okay.
But that was the one that kind of like made it more, you know, less of a local phenomenon. I started to
Right.
kind of be known in a more national way. And that was really exciting for me. And,
Sure.
you know, I got to teach people about recipes and sort of the history behind them and some of the techniques of the trade. And so, you know, from there, the Columbia Room blew up. And 2015, I was named the best bartender in America by Imbibe magazine. And
Amazing.
2017, the Columbia Room won Best American Cocktail Bar at Tales of the Cocktail Spirit Awards. So ostensibly, I was on top of the world. Like I really
Yeah.
had made a great name for myself in the industry. And, you know, I worked in all of these different positions, as you said, as a bar owner, as a restaurateur, as a general manager, as a sommelier. But, you know, that I really centered in on kind of the experience behind drinking
Right.
and sort of providing context to where these cocktails come from and all of that. So then we can get into more of my story as we go along, but I'll stop right
Yeah.
there.
Well, and we can go, and maybe similar to me. There's kind of the personal story, and then the commercial business story. And it sounds like from a restaurant experience, you know, from all the way back in the deli, all the way up to kind of national recognition as a bartender and as a from a hospitality perspective. When you start to break that down, and we start to weave in, you know, say from a non-alc, but still an adult experience perspective, you know, how did that break down? Like, talk a bit about, you know, maybe what you're doing now. We can kind of connect the dots back, but from a maybe from a drink perspective, like what are the elements with and without alcohol that kind of are consistent throughout, or what are the things that you see as important?
Sure. I mean, one of the things to note is even though I hadn't yet changed my drinking habits,
Right.
I was already familiar with the fact that there are all of these great classic drinks that are without alcohol. So if you
Interesting.
look back at all of the 19th century bartending guides, and the very first one in terms of a bartending guide is in
Okay.
1862 by Jerry Thomas. You know, we affectionately refer to him as the professor.
Wow.
And he, in his book, you know, he had initially only about 10 cocktails, right?
Okay.
But he had other drinks, sours, flips, punches, and so forth. But he also had a number of drinks called temperance drinks, right? And those were
Okay.
drinks without alcohol. So one of those was called an orgeat lemonade, which is a combination of orgeat, which is an almond syrup, lemon, um, sugar, water, and you know, I usually would use crushed ice and mint on it as well.
Okay.
And it's a really delicious drink, actually. And so my business partner in the Columbia Room and later on Drink Company actually, you know, didn't drink. And so the first time that her and I kind of like she came to my bar and sat there, I made her this orgeat lemonade. So I was already familiar with all of these great temperance and old cocktails that did
Right.
not include alcohol. So for me, it wasn't really strange in that sense, right? There was
Okay.
already this, you know, you know, a secret advocate in the sense that like it was
That's so
not
interesting.
something I
And yeah,
advertised, but it was there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Then something I didn't know. My kind of layman's experience was that cocktails came more out of prohibition when they were kind of working with ingredients like bathtub gin and had to kind of cover the flavors with various things. So that's so interesting to find out that the history goes well before that and had a temperance component that predates what a lot of people think about in terms of alcohol free as its origins, or at least some of its milestones as it relates to prohibition. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, all of the bartending books of the time would include temperance recipes. It was very
Yeah.
common
Yeah.
because bartenders, you know, were advocates for mindful drinking back then too.
Yeah.
So, you know, we tend to think of this as something new and trendy, and there are aspects of it that are, but I mean, truthfully, it was one of the largest social movements in the United States is
Huge,
temperance.
much bigger than even it is now by a long shot. So that's really interesting. Tell me a bit about, I mean, you've seen it from both sides and kind of gone through the arc. You know, some of the perspectives or maybe preconceived notions, maybe assumptions that I've got are kind of a pejorative attitude of hospitality restaurants, restaurant owners, sommeliers, food critics, bartenders, as it relates to alcohol free. Like, you're on the front lines. What's your experience with that amongst your colleagues or amongst the industry, and how has it changed kind of past, present, future?
Sure. I mean, so when I started getting into the idea of creating non-alcoholic cocktails, it was because my life had changed, and
Right.
alcohol was never not serving me in a way, and we can or cannot get into that story. But what had happened is I realized that I wanted, you know, I kind of almost wanted to leave the industry, because I didn't know what to do. All along, I'd been
Yeah.
telling people like, drink these great drinks, drink this great rye whiskey or what have you.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I was like, I'm just kidding. Don't drink. Like that wasn't an option to stay the course. At least I didn't think so. But as I started to talking to
Right.
people, first kind of inner circle, and then as I went all outward with people who had supported me in the past, everyone was really receptive to it. Everybody liked the idea that there would be choice,
Right.
that you could drink, cocktails with alcohol, without alcohol, low alcohol, all of that. And so that's when I really started kind of turn the corner and focus more on no and low alcohol cocktails.
Right.
There was a lot of things that happened there. One, the most receptive group of people along the way were bartenders. And the reason
Wow.
why is because bartenders have always had to deal with people who have problems around alcohol. There's nothing new to a bartender. If you're telling me you're a bartender and you've never experienced a problematic drinking, then I don't think you've actually bartended, so
Right.
that
Yeah.
doesn't seem reasonable.
Yeah.
And so a lot of bartenders that I knew and I met and I was talking to were like, this is fantastic. We need this, right? Like they wanted to still make great cocktails, but they also wanted to make non-alcoholic cocktails or low alcohol cocktails. They just really wanted to provide choices. And so the people who were least receptive in some ways were sometimes the business owners,
Okay.
because they weren't on the front lines. They didn't really know what
Right.
people were asking for. But this group of people already knew there were people who come in and say, hey, could I get a non-alcoholic cocktail because my wife's pregnant, or because I'm going to run a marathon tomorrow, or my religious, whatever reason. They already had to kind of scramble behind the scenes to figure out how they were going to make these non-alcoholic cocktails. And so for me, what's interesting is I kind of already knew instinctively how to make them. Plus, I'd read all these great classic recipes, but I didn't have like a theory of it per se. I hadn't really sat down and broken it down. And this goes back to an earlier question that you had. I started to do that, and I started to look at the components of a non-alcoholic cocktail. And in that sense, it was looking at a cocktail not from its historic definition, which is, in 1806 spirit, sugar, water, bitters, right?
Right.
Even though the first mention of a cocktail is in 1798, and it is not certain that it contained alcohol, right?
Wow.
It contained ginger. It was mentioned in a London newspaper called the Morning Gazetteer.
Wow.
And it was listed among other other cocktails that had alcohol, but it did not itself indicate that it had alcohol. And so David Wondrich, a historian and writer of cocktails, actually suggested that it may not have contained alcohol. So that's another story. We don't know that one for sure.
Very
There's some people who debate that.
Super interesting.
And so essentially, I started thinking about not from that historic perspective, but from a sensory perspective, right? Like what are the components that make it up? And so that's what started my book, Mindful Mixology, A Comprehensive Guide to No and Low Alcohol Cocktails. That was kind of the structure of it, is I wanted to like talk about that. And so for me, there was like an intensity of flavor. That's a really important part of it, right? When you drink a cocktail, you're drinking a cocktail. There's really not a surprise there, unless you didn't intend to drink it. Because it's always got that intense flavor behind it. There's the piquancy or the bite. And that bite is really, associated with the alcohol itself, whiskey or tequila, when you take a shot and slam your fist down on the table. And then you have, the length that comes from the alcohol itself, right? Like the difference between a Tom Collins and a lemonade is the gin.
Right.
So sorry, there's some shuffling of chairs in the background, so I hope it's
No
not taking
worries.
up too much.
No, there's
Um,
an Amtrak train from Boston to New York's right behind us, and the heater's on here. So I've asked Andrew to come in and turn it off. So we have
okay,
it's the holiday season. It's the noisy season, so that's okay. All
awesome.
good.
Well, I'm right next to a bar, so it's appropriate too.
Thanks, Andrew.
And then one quick thing, Chris, of note is that I cannot see you, but I assume you're still there because I can hear you. So I don't know if that relates to the recording.
Could you see me and now you can't, or you never could?
Correct. I could see you and now I can't. So I don't know if that's affecting
All
anything in
right.
the recording, but I just want to mention that in case.
As far as I can tell, we're still recording. Not sure why you can't see me.
You're back.
All right. Well, let's keep going.
Awesome. So sorry for that interlude, but
no worries.
But so essentially, the last component. So I mentioned the intensity of flavor. I mentioned piquancy, and I mentioned the length of the cocktail. And the final one is the texture or the richness, which is one of the hardest things to provide in, because the piquancy, you can use vinegar, you can use bitterness, you can use cayenne, you can use there's a range of flavors that actually produce that bite, right?
Right.
Some more effective than others.
Right.
But in terms of the texture, very often non-alcoholic cocktails are watery or insipid, So I think that, you have to pay attention to that. So that's kind of how I based the theory of a non-alcoholic cocktail in my book. And I go through some of the details of that. So here's the thing. The way that relates to the way people receive cocktails is making cocktails in this context is like speaking Spanish, right? And making non-alcoholic cocktails is like speaking Italian.
Okay.
If you know Spanish, there are certain cognates that translate across the board, right?
Yeah.
So if you know Spanish, it's easier to learn Italian and vice versa. But just because you speak Spanish doesn't mean you do speak Italian. So you have to kind of learn more than just those cognates. You have to kind of get into it and realize, look, if I want something to taste like a cocktail, but has no alcohol in it, I have to adjust for that. So.
Yeah, I love that. And this is by far the most technical, and I mean from a mixology perspective episode we've had. So I'm definitely going to make sure that everyone knows that when we share this. So first of all, thank you for that. There's a couple of things couple of directions I want to go. One is your story. So from the Columbia room to positive damage, maybe talk a bit about that. And then I want to come back to some of the pieces on recipes and things like that.
Absolutely. My favorite conversations of the world are conversations I call ping pong conversations, where it's a ding, 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 back and forth. So I'm loving
Good.
this.
Well, we'll check that box.
I hope the listeners are following along. So in essence, I mentioned the Columbia room. I started the Columbia room, and my career started to grow at a national level, and everything was going really well in that way. I also expanded it. I opened a couple different bars, one of which would later become what's called Pop-Up Bar, or PUB Pub. And we had something called Game of Thrones Pop-Up Bar, which at one point had 90,000 people come through in 1 month. So that was pretty intense. And so my career catapulted very quickly into a lot of different directions. But I personally, my life had become sort of enmeshed in drinking and in a way that wasn't healthy. And that relates going back all the way to 16-year-old Derek in a restaurant who was learning how to drink from grizzled old line cooks and waitresses. It was not, some of the line cooks were grizzled, and some of the waitresses too, but we'll describe that. But I won't get into too much detail about that. But they had gone through experiences in life, and they were wonderful people, but their drinking was normalized to every night, drinking way into the morning and all of that. And so that's the culture I learned. And you mentioned Anthony Bourdain and his book. And I think that, I lived some of that, and so by the time I was successful, in terms of my career, I was sinking in terms of my life, like a lot of I will say that the outcomes of my life were not positive. My relationships, my finances, my health were all kind of in the red. And so I had to really look at my life and alcohol as part of it and decide, is this serving me or not? And I addressed aspects of my mental health, which I think is a huge part of this industry too. A lot of people in this industry suffer from aspects of mental health. And a lot of people who are addicted also have issues around mental health. And so I had to address that. And once I did that, alcohol didn't seem like something I wanted to continue in the same way. And so I didn't really become sober in the sense that most people do, where I cut out alcohol at first. What I did is I just reduced my drinking, and it
Right.
led to this sort of positive spiral in my life where I ate better, I had better relationships. And this is for me. I want to clarify that I don't expect anyone else will or will not drink alcohol. In fact, in some ways, I don't care, right? Like
Right.
what I care about
Yeah.
is
It's
a
not about that.
person makes decisions for themselves that are, aligned with their goals, and that no longer aligned with my goals. And so I wanted a different life. And I had a son that was born, and I was growing older, and I had this commercial success, but in terms of my own success, it wasn't there.
Right.
So I had to redefine success for me. And eventually I would stop drinking altogether. And that's when I kind of dug in deeper to, um, no and low alcohol cocktail. And I saw that it was something really growing. It was around 2018 or 2019. And people
Right.
like Julia Bainbridge had
Yep.
already started talking about this. And I was really impressed, and I was inspired by them actually to do the
Yes.
same, to go out there and tell my story and talk about this. I sold the Columbia room earlier this year, right, in February. And I started Positive Damage because I knew that I wanted to work to provide, I guess, more room at the bar for no and low alcohol cocktails is the best way to say it. And I also wanted to, in a way, teach America how to drink, right? I
Yeah.
didn't want to say don't drink alcohol or just drink this. I just wanted to say, let's be mindful, let's be thoughtful about why we drink, and let's have choices that represent what we want, And so for most people, the goal isn't to get hammered or to sink their life per se.
Right.
Most people's goal is to have a good time and connect with people and enjoy their lives. And there's lots of different ways to do that. And so for me, no and low alcohol cocktails are a part of that choice structure, so to say. Like people have that option, and we have to go out there. And I know that you're doing this, and there's so many people out there doing this. Julia Bainbridge is out there doing this,
Yes.
that are
Absolutely.
providing choices to people, and it's really noble work as far as I'm concerned, because
Yeah.
it helps people to live the life they want to.
Yeah. I love that. And, in a way, it still, it honors your profession and your tradition, but it creates with the fruition of something newer and kind of that's grown out of that. And it definitely, we're much more, sometimes I joke, kind of in the back, kind of in infrastructure of the industry in terms of what's happening with some of the great innovation in the making of various products and categories, all the way through to getting and educating customers, but making it fun and interesting and adult in a sophisticated environment that you're not losing that is so important. And I think there's, as you said, there's a lot of great people doing great pieces, but really kind of the expertise that you provide and that mindset um, really adds a whole extra dimension as this industry starts to evolve. So that's why I'm excited, to be talking to you, and also to be having kind of conversations around what we hopefully will be able to be doing together as this whole space evolves. So thank you. Before we go, I know it is coming up on the holiday season, and I wanted to shout out for your recent article in Newsweek. I often get asked, I was doing an interview earlier today about cocktails. I am not by any stretch of the imagination, qualified. I usually go to your site for ideas, or I ping you or something. Um, with the holidays coming up and dry January, are there any cocktail recipes, knowing that that's the kind of question we might get sometimes, that you might want to call out? If I'm a listener and I'm loving what I'm hearing, but I am not an expert, but it's the holidays, I'm going to a holiday party. I'm going to be with my family. I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but I also want to feel like an adult. What can I bring, and what can I have for myself? And then maybe there'll be some people at the party that I either know in advance or might be interested, where I can kind of celebrate what's happening in this space, but knowing I'm not a professional.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'll point out a couple that were in that article that I think are pretty easy. For one, there's
Amazing.
something called a champagne cocktail. This is a cocktail from the 19th
Okay.
century.
Champagne
It,
cocktail.
it's
Classic.
in essence a champagne old fashioned. You take a sugar cube, you dash some bitters on it, you add champagne, and then you add a lemon peel. And that peel is actually more important than you might think in terms of adding flavor and aroma and all
Okay.
that
It's
stuff.
not just for
So
show.
is not just for show. And so that is a really easy cocktail. Almost anybody can make. You just put everything in the glass and it's there.
Okay.
And obviously, with champagne, it's low alcohol. But if you use something like Thompson and Scott's Naughty Sparkling Chardonnay, then it really makes a
Perfect.
wonderful. And if you want to go completely zero alcohol, you can use all the bitters, aromatic bitters as well, right?
Yeah, I love it. Okay.
Super simple cocktail to make. You just take that one step up and you do something that's an old fashioned. You could take something like Kentucky 74, and they have that new spiced product. I don't know if y'all care. I assume you carry that as well, but or you could take their bourbon alternative and make an old fashioned with that. What I would suggest is also use a ginger syrup. And there's a ginger syrup called Horse's Kick. I used to work for them, so I am biased. But the Horse's Kick ginger syrup is a wonderful. Use like a half an ounce. Use 2.25 ounces of the spirit list. Use all the bitters, aromatic bitters, and orange bitters, whatever one you want. And use an orange peel now, some ice, stir it up, and you have a great old-fashioned, ginger old-fashioned, right? So that kind of like takes it just to one more level.
Right.
One of my favorite, though, that's very holiday-oriented is called Gluck, right?
Okay. How do you spell that? Okay.
GLO with the slash through it, GG, or sometimes there's an umlaut as well, depending on if it's Gluck or Glühwein too, right? It's a mulled wine. And so Thompson Scott makes a naughty red as well. And there's also quite a few good non-alcoholic wines out there that you all carry. People obviously can get it from there that you can use to make mulled wine with. So I have a recipe in the Newsweek. Unfortunately, I think it'd be too complicated going to here, but if they go to that article,
mulled wine.
Yeah, you can make that, and that really makes the house smell really festive and wonderful. You make it right before guests come over, and then you can just ladle it out, and it's really easy and delicious.
Those are great. So what I'll ask our team to do is maybe pull a few of those together when we get this episode out to to people before the holidays. So those were great suggestions. Thank you. And
I also want to mention one thing. One
please,
of the
go
things
ahead.
that people criticize about non-alcoholic cocktails is that they all are lemonade in some version, right? I even mentioned the Orgeat lemonade, so I did myself no favor by saying that. But none of these drinks are a bunch of juice or a bunch of sugar. These are all delicious, adult, sophisticated, complicated.
Yeah, they're not just fancied up kids' sodas. This is much more than that. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you for that. I'm looking forward to the year ahead and hearing more and working more with you around what's coming. Before we sign off, I want to make sure you get a chance to share Positive Damage or Derek Brown. How can people follow you? Keep in touch with what you're up to.
Yeah, so I think social media is probably easiest. On Twitter, I'm Positive DMG, and on Instagram, I'm Positive Damage INC Inc. So I'd love for people to follow me there. They can go to my website, Positive Damage Inc. too, and sometimes I have classes. I don't know if this will air in time, but I have a holiday class. It's on the 14th and 21st. And I do events as well. We're actually working towards doing another Mindful Drinking Festival coming up in January. So stay tuned. Yeah, more to come.
Okay. I will try to get the team out there. It is the 6th of December today. So Derek Brown, founder of Columbia Room and Positive Damage Inc. Thank you so much for your time and appreciate everything you're doing.
And you too, Chris. Thank you so much for providing really awesome products.
Yeah, love it. Thanks. Take care, Derek. Bye-bye.
Yeah, you too.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Alcohol Free Radio. We'd love to hear from you. Send us a message on social media or through email at hello@betterroads.com. Great to be here with you all together. Take care.